All right. Is it all right if I move this stuff, Ricky? All right. Well, it's a pleasure to be here with you guys. When Ernesto asked me to do it, I was very grateful for the opportunity. And Ricky really put the...
Changing things up on me, bro. I'm not used to taking everything all apart on you.
He really put the spotlight on me when he said I do a great job preaching, so I'll try and live up to that. Tonight we're going to be in Daniel chapter 6. We're going to start on verse 10. But while you guys are turning to verse 10, I'll just kind of give you a little bit of a rundown on what's going on with the first 10 verses. I probably should start over and just mention that, like he said, my name is Tom Tate. I'm from the Rock Church. And I have been with Ernesto and his training group for almost 2 years now. And it's been an incredible journey. This is probably my third time preaching, and every time has been amazing and an eye-opening experience. So with that being said, let's turn to Daniel 6, start with verse 10, and I'll just give you the rundown. What's going on is there's, in the chapter of Daniel, there's 12 chapters, or in the book of Daniel, there's 12 chapters. The first 6 chapters are about Daniel and his journey with his buddies and kind of his experiences, and then chapters 7 through 12 are more of like Daniel's visions on the future. And what's happening in chapter 6 is the story of the lion's den. So King Darius, who is the king of Medo-Persia, has set 120 satraps, and satraps are basically like tax collectors that do odds and ends things for the king, and he's appointed 3 governors to kind of oversee them and keep them honest because they're handling a lot of money. So what happens is King Darius puts Daniel in charge, and they're not big on this because whenever there's a new person in power, if you're not big on them or whatever, there can be issues there. And so they try to find a way to overthrow Daniel and kind of get him out of King Darius's favor. So what they do is they try to dig up some dirt on his life and find something that they can present to Darius that might make him be displeased or unhappy with Daniel, and they can't find anything. So what they do is they go after the one thing that Daniel really shows in his life, and that's his faith. So they come up with a decree that for 120 days, or for 30 days, there's not to be any worshiping of any other kings or gods other than King Darius. And they take this to King Darius, and King Darius signs it. It's a law. So here we go, verse 10. It says, "Now when Daniel knew that the document was signed, he entered his house, now in his roof chamber, as he had windows open toward Jerusalem, and he continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, as he had been doing previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and supplication before his God. Then they approached and spoke before the king about the king's injunction. 'Did you not sign an injunction that any man who makes a petition to any god or man besides you, O king, for 30 days is to be cast into the lion's den?' The king replied, 'The statement is true according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which may not be revoked.'" So we're going to stop there at the end of 12, and if you go back to the end of verse 10 here, there's a part of the verse I want to point out. It says that he had continued kneeling on his knees 3 times a day, praying and giving thanks before his God, right here, as he had been doing previously. So Daniel's not doing anything different today that he did yesterday or that he'll do the next day, right? Knowing that there's a law that if you worship God, that you'll get thrown into the lion's den, he goes up to where he lives, opens the windows without a care in the world, does what he did yesterday, knowing what the law is, and he'll do it again tomorrow. Sometimes being bold, and this morning's sermon is about boldness. So sometimes being bold is just maintaining faith in the midst of persecution, knowing that you're going to be attacked in your faith or even in your life, doing the same thing that you did yesterday or that you'll do tomorrow. Just maintaining the faith is one of the forms of boldness. And the thing about boldness is that it's going to bring about opposition from friends, family, neighbors, coworkers. It's going to come from all directions. But probably the biggest and scariest way that it will come towards you is through Satan. And I like to, Satan, the way he works is if you are kind of not impacting anyone's life, and if you're just kind of going day to day, not just lukewarm, right? He's kind of just going to let you maintain that lifestyle. It's almost like bumper bowling. He's just going to kind of bounce you back and forth because you're not really causing any harm to him, and you're not really charging up any believers. So he just kind of leaves you be. It's the ones that are on fire for God and the ones that are out there trying to be bold and get into the spiritual fight. Those are the ones that he actively attacks. For instance, I'll get into my call to ministry in a little bit, but for me, leading up to a couple of weeks ago, I preached at the Rock, and that was one of the bigger things that I've ever done in my life, believe it or not. It was one of the more nerve-wracking things that I've ever done, but I had a month's notice to do that, and I noticed that every morning leading up to that sermon that I did, before I'd even open my eyes, I would feel Satan, it felt like, speaking to me, you can't do this. And it got actively and increasingly more intense the closer I got to that sermon. And then the morning that I did preach, or the morning of the day that I preached, because I preached a Saturday night, it was gone. And that has nothing to do with me. That was all God. But I'm just saying that Satan will attack you. I mean, not to get too on a tangent here of my own personal life, but we had a child. My wife had a child 2 weeks ago, and we just got our baby home from the NICU yesterday, which made our life a little bit more hectic leading up to me doing this morning. It kind of fuzzed my mind a little bit, and not to say that every bad thing that happens in your life is Satan, but I do believe that when you are trying to do things for God, when you're trying to accept His challenges, that sometimes Satan will get in the way and try to throw you off track. So what do we do with all this boldness? I mean, you give it to God, right? That's what I've decided to do. And once you give it to Him, not only does He give you the opportunities to be bold, right? But He helps you through it. He's helping me through it right now. He helped me through it at the Rock. The hardest part is just accepting the mindset that you're willing to be bold for Him, and He really does the rest. I mean, He really does the rest. He's so incredible. I'll tell you guys a little bit about when I was 18 years old. I flew out of Columbus. I flew into Chicago O'Hare for boot camp for the Navy, and I got there, put all my stuff in a box, shipped it back home. They start giving us the rundown of like what's happening, what the next 3 months are going to look like. And at some point in that process, they told us, listen, you can go to church in the chapel from 10 to 11:30 if you'd like. It's optional. So I remember, they walk out of the room, and so it's just us recruits in there kind of getting our stuff situated. And I was like, this is going to be, I'll definitely go to that. Not only did I grow up going to church, but you're telling me that for an hour and a half, they're going to leave me alone, they can't bother me or do anything? Sign me up. So my mentality was, I'm going to go to this. And I just remember there being like a real battle-hardened, macho mentality in that room, and everybody's like, I'm not going to that. I didn't come here to go to chapel. And I just kind of kept my head down because, the old saying, the nail that sticks out gets the hammer. So I decided to just kind of be neutral and mellow and not go. I didn't go for a whole month. And then I just kind of hit me like, what are you doing? You need to go. So at boot camp, anytime you go outside in general and you're on the base, you have to march. So I marched from the barracks to the chapel every Sunday from 10 to 11:30 by myself. And I noticed that after about a month, so we're in the second month of 3, that there was a guy marching behind me. And we didn't really talk much about church, but he was marching with me, and we went. And by the end of boot camp, there was 4 to 5 of us that were consistently going. And again, that's not me at all. That's God doing it. But it's little opportunities like that that you can take, being bold, that make a huge difference. And really, once you decide, once you accept it, like I'm going to be bold, and you take the opportunities God gives you and you just do it with His strength, then He does incredible things. He does incredible things. And He's doing something incredible with Daniel right now. So we're going to pick up back at verse 16. There's a few verses I skipped between 12 and 16 here, but all that's really happening is the governors are saying, listen, we know you love Daniel, we know he's your buddy, but he's breaking the law, and he needs to go into the lion's den. So, verse 16, it says that then the king gave orders, and Daniel was brought in and cast into the lion's den. The king spoke and said to Daniel, your God, whom you constantly serve, will himself deliver you. A stone was brought and laid over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet rings of his nobles, so that nothing would be changed in regard to Daniel. Then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. Then the king arose at dawn, at the break of day, and went in haste to the lion's den. When he had come near the den to Daniel, he cried out with a troubled voice. The king spoke and said to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you constantly serve, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel spoke to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, and as much as I have found innocent before him, and also toward you, O king, I have committed no crime. Then the king was very pleased and gave orders for Daniel to be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he had trusted in God. I think there's a verse that we just read. I always thought it was kind of interesting. It says that basically that King Darius, it says, then the king went off to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no entertainment was brought before him, and his sleep fled from him. Daniel goes into the lion's den, and I would assume that in the first 30 seconds when he realizes the lions aren't coming after me, they're not trying to eat me alive, we know that Daniel knows God well enough by now to know that maybe God's doing something with this opportunity in his life. And so Daniel probably feels slightly at peace with the situation that he's in. I wouldn't say he slept great, but I would say he probably slept okay, you know. He's obviously a believer in God. He trusts God. And so I just think it's interesting that that King Darius refuses entertainment. He refuses to eat. And that's slightly because he loves Daniel a lot, you know, so he's worried about his buddy. But I have to believe that there's some guilt in there, too, that he's not. This is an opportunity for King Darius to be bold as well. And he's seen the things that God does in Daniel's life. I'm sure that he must believe in God a little bit. So sometimes I think that the guilt in this situation is eating at King Darius a little bit, causing him not to sleep very well, while Daniel, who is literally the one that's in danger, is probably sleeping a lot better. That whole situation there just kind of, I just think that it's funny, the irony there. But sometimes with boldness, you'll know you're there when you're outside of your comfort zone. When I was preaching at the Rock about a month ago, I would say that's probably the most uncomfortable I've ever been in my life. But God helped me through it. He helped me through it in amazing ways with people that he's put in my life, with the prep and the help that I got along the way. God will help you do it. And with my call to ministry, I was in church one night, and our pastor was just going off. He was just going off. He's a very emotional preacher. He's a lot like Ernesto, and I felt very charged up that night. And I wrote on a note in my Bible to my wife. I said, I know what I want to do. And we talked about it in the car. And by that night, I was signed up for Colorado Christian. And I am currently 5 classes away from graduating with an associate's degree. But then a few weeks later, I met with another pastor at our church, Pastor Scott, who set me up with Ernesto and this group. And, you know, the comfort zone from... we have we have 5 children. So the comfort zone of trying to take on college was a real thing. You know, like, can we handle it? Can I handle it? Am I putting a lot of stress on my wife? And then joining a group of guys that I didn't know, and Ernesto, who I barely knew, having to go meet with them and talk with them, share my life with them, and then preach in front of them was a comfort zone. And then, you know, you go from 7 guys, 11 guys preaching to preaching a Saturday night at the Rock was another comfort zone. Being here, new group, comfort zone. I'm not bragging. It's all God doing it. I'm just saying that you'll know you're being bold when you're uncomfortable. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's really nothing wrong with being uncomfortable, because I'm slowly realizing, and I guess I'm just expressing out loud, that when you get into that uncomfortable zone and you know that you're with God and God's going to take care of you, He's going to get you through it, and it's really not as bad once you get going with it as it is before it starts when you're thinking about it. Being doers of the word is huge, not just listeners. Church is important. It's very important. Listening is what got me started in my journey, but there comes a point where you stop listening, you continue listening, and you start doing. My wife and I just recently this year decided that we were going to be beekeepers. Me more so just being supportive of her. She's really always just wanted to be a beekeeper, and so we went to a class in the spring where they kind of show you the bees, teach you about the bees, and it's all real calm. You know, you're sitting there and you're listening, and you're like, this is interesting stuff. I'm excited to do it, right? But then the day comes when you have to go to the place where the bees are, pick up the box, and bring that box home, and you're talking about 15,000 bees with stingers on every one of them, and it's time to stop listening at that point, and it's time to start doing. And it's all about the prep and how well you listened, but there does come a point when it's time to do, and it's the same thing here with our faith. There just comes a point where, you know, eventually there's actively a spiritual war out there, and it's okay to get yourself right and get yourself in a good mindset and get educated. But then at a certain point, it is time to go out there and start actively helping our brothers and sisters in the spiritual war that we're fighting. Our pastor, our lead pastor, Pastor Wes, has said it several times that he considers himself more of an introvert than an extrovert. He loves his family, he loves being home, and he's large crowds aren't necessarily his favorite thing in the world, and that's totally fine. You are who you are, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there is a point where, and I think he does a really great job of this, where it's being bold is not just for extroverts. If you're more of an introvert, that's okay. But when God gives you the opportunities, when you feel the calling, you just go do it. He gives you the strength, and you have an extrovert's mentality basically, and you get out there. And that will put you out of your depth. You know, there's comfort zones and there's depths. And being out of your comfort zone is almost the same thing as being out of your depth, but you're going to be asked to do new things along the way, and you're going to be out of your depth. And those are moments for growth. I've realized I'm not, I want to clarify that I'm not a pastor, so I'm not talking at you. I'm learning with you. But getting out of your depth, you're going to do new things all the time, and that's good. That's growth. One character in the Bible, I thought about this a lot, like what character was I going to insert into this part of the sermon and the getting out of your depth part, and I found that I enjoyed Josiah the most. Josiah is an 8-year-old boy who one day is just an 8-year-old boy, and then the very next day he's a king. And his father and his grandfather were both really awful, evil men who allowed the worship of idols, who never listened to God's direction. And one day, Josiah comes in as the king, knocks down all the idols, decides today is the day that I'm going to listen, the kingdom is going to follow God. And, you think about it, like an 8-year-old boy, he could have just waited another 8 years, let's say, and been 16, and then decided to figure things out for 8 years. But he decides off the bat, we're going to change things up. I'm not worried about opinions. I'm not worried about my relationships. I'm going to follow God. Our kingdom is going to follow God, and it's incredible to think about from an 8-year-old. But that boldness usually will cost you something if you think about it. It could cost you a job promotion. It could cost you relationships. It can cost you your pride, you know. But when we see the cost, when you think about the cost, it's important that you don't shy away from what you're being called to do. And I'm guilty of it. I think, it's a very easy thing. It's human nature to shy away from things that can hurt us or cost us something. I got hurt in November of last year. I broke my leg. I was putting up Christmas lights, and I'd been on the roof plenty of times cleaning our chimneys and things like that. So I think I was a little bit arrogant and cocky, and I had my 12-year-old son up there with me, and I had him holding the ladder, and I'm just going too fast and not being careful, and I fell from the second floor to the first floor roof, and I broke my ankle in several spots. I had to have a surgery and a bone graft and things like that. And I just remember immediately following the injury thinking like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I was inside of my 1-year probation at my job, so I had to worry about insurance. I had to worry about money. I had to worry about, I just said it, but really my job in general, I was probationary, and I broke my bones. So would they keep me, and Christmas is coming. It's the end of November. Lots of things that I was concerned about. And like I just told you guys, we just had our son last Monday, and if you think about it, that timeline, we just found out a few weeks before I broke it that we were having him. And within weeks, and a lot of prayer, but within weeks, all those things were taken care of. Like we knew within weeks that all those things were fine. And those are the little moments that need to encourage us of all the good things in the world that should encourage us to be bold. But it's, when you think about Judas Iscariot, right? One of the disciples, all the things that he saw the feeding of the 5,000, Jesus calming the storm, and Lazarus raising from the dead. He saw all those things, and he still turned from God. What I'm trying to point out here is that there's great things that happen in our lives every day, and it's very easy to see all these great and wonderful things happening in our lives or happening in characters in the Bible, and it's still so easy to shy away from God when you see the cost. It's a real thing, and it happens in the Bible, and they make it a point to point that out in several stories in the Bible. Will God always save us? I think that no, but he will always help us. Does God promise us that he's going to save us from whatever? Did he promise Daniel that he was going to save Daniel from the lion's den? No, he did not. Daniel did everything that happened in the lion's den through faith, and he was okay with the consequences. But if you notice, God helps him through every bit of it, And this isn't the only trial Daniel goes through in his life. If you read the book of Daniel, he goes through quite a bit in his life, but God helps him through all of it. If you guys, if you have your Bibles, turn to Psalm 28 real quick, verse 7. I just want to show you something. It says that the Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, and I am helped. Therefore my heart exalts, and my song I shall thank him. The Lord is my strength and my shield. My heart trusts in him, right? And then what's it say? I am helped. It's right there. If we trust in him, he'll help us. It doesn't say that he'll always save us, but God will always be there to help us. And I think that that's very encouraging. So what do we do with all of this knowledge, right? How do we get better? God obviously is the key component and like encouraging us in our boldness and our faith. But what else do we have? We have Christ followers. It's important that when we have our body in the church, but then when you get out of the church, it's important to have people in your life that are going to give you good Christian counsel, encourage you to be bold, and help you through those times when you're waning or you're straining. Proverbs 27:17 says that iron sharpens iron, and so one man sharpens another. It's important that we sharpen each other as the body and as Christ followers. If I've noticed that in my life, myself and friends of mine, there's times in your life when you need counsel, and it's important that you seek Christian counsel, Christ-following counsel, for those times when you feel like you're straining at the oars, and you're not feeling encouraged to be bold. If you have the right people in your life, that can be very helpful. When I was growing up, I went to a church called Buckeye Christian Church, and our pastor would say it quite a bit. He'd always say that the right thing is often the hardest thing. And that's not always the case. I'm not saying that 100% of the time that's the case, but if you think about it, like, the right thing isn't always what we want to do. The hardest thing sometimes is not the thing that we go for, but oftentimes it's the right thing. And it's time that we do that we start to strive for the right thing, and that we get into the fight of the spiritual war that I've referenced several times. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie. I'm going to date myself here, but if you're 25 or younger, you're probably not going to know what I'm talking about. The movie's called Top Gun, and it's a good movie, very good movie, but it is in color, by the way. It's got Tom Cruise in it and several other people. There's a scene at the end of the movie that Tom Cruise, Maverick, he's a backup pilot, and Iceman is another American pilot who's in the middle of a fight for his life. There's 5 Russian pilots around him, and they're in this huge fight. They call Maverick in. Maverick gets all the way out there, and he has a flashback to when he lost his buddy, so he bails out for a second. And you can hear in the movie, if you listen to it, his co-pilot, Merlin, he's yelling, we got to get in there. We got to help Iceman. We got to get back in the fight. And when this note came up in my sermon that we need to get into the fight, every time Top Gun came in, and I just felt like it was a good illustration. Sometimes we got to get back in there. There's our Christian brothers and sisters are out there, and they're in the fight of their life. They're trying to do God's will, and they need other people out there with their boldness, encouraging them and helping them, supporting them. And the quicker we can get into the fight, the better. So with that being said, I want to share with you guys quickly the lyrics to a song. It's called In Christ Alone, and it says that I find my strength, I find my hope, I find my help in Christ alone. When fear ascends, when darkness falls, I find my peace in Christ alone. If it's okay with you guys, I'd like to close in prayer, and we'll go from there. So, dear Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for the opportunity to just come up here and do this request that you've asked of me. Thank you for the opportunity, Lord. You've done so many amazing things in my life, and I just want to pray for the people in this room that have so patiently and graciously listened to me get through this. I hope that you can help us find the strength and the hope, the help and the peace that we all need to get through this and to be bold in our faith, Lord. Help us to sharpen each other, Lord, and just not to worry about persecution and opposition. Help us to just trust in you and know that you'll get us through it, and that all we need to do is just ask for the opportunity and have the mindset to be bold for you, and that you'll really take over from there and help us through in everything that we do. Lord, I love you, and I thank you for everything that you've done for me in my life, and I pray that you bless everyone in this room. It's in your name, amen.